Hello my beautiful friends, welcome back to my channel. It is so good to have you back here again for a new episode. And if you are new here, hello and welcome. Why don't you stick around to see what kind of shocking but also very interesting true crime story I have for you today. And of course, please do subscribe to the channel. Now, before I get into the story, I have to give out a channel disclaimer, and that is my channel is not meant to disrespect any of the victims or the families of the victims I talk about in these videos. The information that I share with my audience is simply just research that I took from different sources of the internet. And the main purpose of my channel is for educational and awareness purposes of the different types of crimes we face on a daily basis. And the content warning is, in this case, I will be talking about murder, forms of abuse, and also violent acts against children. So if you are sensitive to that type of content, then viewer discretion is very much advised. Okay, I hope you guys are sitting down for this one because it is going to be one of the most heartbreaking things you could have ever heard of. And trust me, it broke me. Research in this case, it broke my heart into a million pieces. So sit back, relax, and let me tell you all about the Adlington family murders. Debbie Martinez was born in 1962. Now, I'm not really sure of the month and the date because I could not find that information, but she grew up in a family of 5, and it was always her 2 parents, David and Margaret, as well as her 2 brothers, her older brother Bruce and her younger brother Nigel. And Debbie was described as a fiercely independent person who always showed this trait from a very young age. On November 23rd in 1985, 23-year-old Debbie was looking through some items in a supermarket. At this time, she worked at a pharmacy that had just opened up in the area. She was looking to buy some cups when a man approached her thinking that she was one of the employees of that supermarket, and he wanted to know where to buy some tapes as well as some records for playing music. And the reason he had Debbie confused with an employee of the shop is because Debbie had a name tag on, but the name tag was the name tag of the pharmacy that Debbie was working at that time. So she told him that she doesn't work there and she has no idea where he could get some records or tapes for playing music. Then a few days after that, Debbie was at work at the pharmacy and she received a telephone call. And on the other end of the call was a young man who introduced himself as Tony Adlington. And he said he was the young man who bumped into her at the supermarket wanting to know where to find some tapes and records. So as they were talking on the phone, Tony started asking Debbie if he could take her out for a dinner date. Debbie was a bit uncertain about going on a date with this guy because at that time she had just gotten out of a very rocky marriage, even though she was at the age of 23, and even though the marriage itself was brief, it still took a toll on her because according to her, she said that her confidence was never the same after that. So she really wasn't looking into getting into a new relationship anytime soon. And as Debbie was still trying to think about whether it's a good idea to go out on a dinner date with this guy, the manager of the pharmacy, who also happened to be a close friend of Debbie's, encouraged her to go out on the dinner date because, come on, what's the worst that could happen? So Debbie ended up agreeing to go on the dinner date with Tony. And even though Tony was 9 years older than Debbie at the time, meaning he was 32, Debbie found him to be quite interesting, charming, intelligent, and she thought that it seemed like he was doing quite well for himself, so he was an accomplished young man. And the age difference gave out a bit of hope to Debbie that there would be a lot of maturity from Tony's side. Tony Adlington was born in 1953 and he grew up in Zimbabwe, and he served in the military, but it's not really known what he served as. It was actually said that he had a very good childhood growing up in Zimbabwe with his family, and his dad was a doctor. In Zimbabwe, he lived with both his parents, his sister Jane, and also his 2 half-sisters, Penny and Sheila. Tony studied to become an accountant, and while he was studying, that's where he became roommates with a longtime friend of his, Robbie Finch. And Robbie Finch described Tony as someone who was always very private, who was always serious, self-assured, and also always in control. And Debbie also saw this always in control side of Tony because she commented that even from the first time they started spending time together, Tony would always take charge and make a lot of the decisions. So she also saw this side of Tony that was always in control. So Tony and Debbie started spending a lot of time together, and the more that happened, the more closer they got to each other. They would often hang out at Tony's flat, and on one Christmas, Tony had to go home to Zimbabwe to spend some time with his family. And when he left, he told Debbie that he wanted her to stay at his flat because he wanted her to be safe. And that's exactly what Debbie did. And while Tony was still in Zimbabwe with his family, he and Debbie were talking on the phone when he brought up the idea of them moving in together. Now, Debbie was a bit uncertain about this because to her, it felt like it was still a bit too soon to be talking about something like that. But eventually, she did agree to move in with Tony, but she didn't permanently get rid of her flat. She still had it in her name because she had a pet bird at that time, but Tony didn't really like having the bird in his flat. So Debbie decided that the bird would always remain at her flat and she would come see it every now and then to feed it, play with it, and make sure that everything is still okay. But I think the main reason she still kept her flat was that in case anything happened between her and Tony, she would still have her own place to fall back on instead of having to start all over again. But Tony ended up softening up a little bit for the bird, and he said that it could come and live with them at his flat, but it had to stay in its cage at all times. That was the one condition that he had for it. But Debbie didn't think that this was the best thing to do for the bird, so she ended up giving it to her mother so she could take care of it. According to Debbie, Tony was always making most of the decisions in their relationship, and it oftentimes felt like he was a very controlling person. The first time she saw this side of his was, of course, when she was forced to give up her pet bird in order for them to be able to live together. And this was basically how their relationship ended up being for most of the time. Debbie wasn't always consulted on the major decisions that were made in the relationship because Tony always had his own needs first in mind and never really thought of hers. And since Debbie was the kind of person who wanted to keep peace in the relationship, she wouldn't really challenge him that much because whenever she did, it wouldn't end well. One time, Tony bought a piece of land to build a house on. Debbie was very excited about this because she thought this was finally going to be the chance for them to build their dream home together and work on it together. But that wasn't going to happen. But instead, Tony would isolate himself in his study for hours, drafting on plans and making up different ideas about the house without even consulting Debbie at all. And whenever Debbie would try to bring up any of her ideas for the house, Tony was very quick to shut those ideas down. Another thing that was said about Tony was that he was a very impulsive person. In February of 1987, Tony told Debbie that he was being transferred to Johannesburg, and he and Debbie ended up moving to Johannesburg without him even consulting with Debbie about how she felt about it or whether she wanted to go to Johannesburg. Debbie's family, on the other hand, were not really up for this idea because at this time, Tony and Debbie still weren't a married couple. And the fact that they weren't married made it even more difficult for Debbie's family to fully support that idea. Tony worked as a director in Johannesburg and Debbie worked as a secretary. And then in 1988, they went back to Durban so they could finally get married. And then in 1989, they moved to the East Rand of Johannesburg because they now decided to start their own family. When Debbie fell pregnant, according to her, Tony was a lot more kinder and more gentle. And more than anything, he was looking forward to being a dad. Then on the 11th of January 1990, the first son, Kevin, was born. And it was said that Tony was a very good father to Kevin. And then on the 29th of August in 1991, their daughter Caitlin was born. And after she was born, Tony and Debbie decided that it would be best for Debbie to be a stay-at-home mom to look after the kids. Because at this time, Tony was still getting a pretty good salary from where he worked, so he was more than capable of taking care of the entire family with his own money. And so they felt that it was unnecessary for them to try to get a babysitter. And in 1992, Debbie fell pregnant once again, and this time Tony was not happy about it. It was actually reported that since the kids that came after Kevin were not as planned as Kevin was, Tony was not all that eager about their existence into the world, even though he still took care of them. But Debbie, on the other hand, was a very devoted mother. So on December 1st in 1992, their third child, Craig, was born. And it was said that after Craig's birth, something definitely changed inside of Tony. He was a completely different person now, and his attitude would be way worse when it came to Craig. 7 months after Craig's birth, Tony told his family that he got a job transfer to Cape Town, so obviously this meant that they had to move once again. And again, this wasn't up for any discussion. And just like that, the family ended up moving to Cape Town. And once they had settled in Cape Town, the kids started asking if they could please have a pet. And specifically, they wanted to have a dog. So then Debbie went to go get them a puppy, and when she came back with the puppy, Tony was not happy about it because he wanted to be the one who decided what kind of dog the family would have. And so he demanded that Debbie return the puppy to where she found it, and then he went to go find a dog of his choosing. And also he wanted to be the one who names the dog, and so he gave the dog the name of Hazel. From time to time, Debbie's mom would visit the family in Cape Town, and she said that whenever she got there, Tony would just be cold and distant, like he was hiding something about himself. And he was always so very dominating over Debbie, and he would also overreact over the smallest of issues. One time when they visited Debbie's family in Durban, Tony was busy reading a newspaper, and then Debbie's father came by and opened up the magazine that came with the newspaper. And when he did that, Tony just stood up without saying anything at all, and then he told his family that they were leaving. And just like that, they packed their bags and they were gone on that very day, even though they had planned to spend a week at Debbie's family's home. But just like that, they left, no explanation whatsoever. In 1996, Debbie found out once again that she was pregnant with their fourth child, and this time Tony wasn't having it. He demanded that she get an abortion, but Debbie refused, this time standing her ground. But even though she had said no, over the next coming weeks, Tony was putting so much pressure on her that she ended up miscarrying the pregnancy. And even as she was having this miscarriage, Tony just took her to the hospital and decided to leave her there by herself because, according to him, he had an important appointment that he had to go to. I don't think this really meant anything to him at all, and if I had to make my own guess, in my own personal opinion, I would even say that he was very glad that she miscarried that baby, because why else would he be so cold towards his own wife when she was going through something so heartbreaking? After this, Debbie said that Tony started becoming more verbally and emotionally abusive towards her, and whenever things wouldn't go his way, it would get even worse. And even though he never got physical with her, she still felt the pain of his verbal and emotional abuse. Two of their kids, on the other hand, were still idolizing Tony because they were still too young to understand what was happening. But Kevin, on the other hand, was growing up, and he was now starting to see that this is not how a dad is supposed to be. It was also said that Tony had some very odd behavior about him. There was a time when he and Debbie went to a butcher shop, and while they were there waiting in line, the lady that was in front of them got distracted by her baby, and when Tony saw that her change was put on the counter, he decided to steal the change before the lady could notice. And another thing that he started doing was he would go to shops and start stealing batteries, and to him this was nothing more than a game. And around this time, the family was headed towards some financial troubles, but since Tony was the only one who handled the finances of the family, he was the only one who knew that this was happening. So without even consulting his wife, he decided to sell their home, something that Debbie was obviously very pissed about. But of course, even though she was pissed about this, it didn't really mean much to Tony because her emotions never mattered. So the family then moved to an enclosed property known as the Marina de Gama property. And Debbie thought that, you know what, since this is an enclosed property, it would mean that the safety of her kids would definitely be ensured, that nothing could possibly happen to them. Little did she know how much things were about to go straight to hell from that point, despite everything that she had already experienced at the hands of her husband's controlling nature as well as his emotional and verbal abuse. As time went on, Debbie got some terrible news that a close friend of hers died of cancer, and this really affected her very badly. And it was also around this time when she started talking to Tony about wanting to leave. And whenever she would bring up the topic of leaving, Tony would just say to her, "You know what, if you're gonna leave, you better not try to take my kids with you." Over the next few months, Debbie said that she started noticing some even more odd behavior from Tony. Like on one instance, she was sleeping, and when she woke up, Tony was just standing next to the bed, just looking at her. And when she wanted to know why he was just staring at her like that, Tony just told her to go back to sleep. In December of 2001, Debbie decided to take the kids to Durban to spend some time with her family. Tony decided to stay behind because he said that he had some business that he had to take care of. But while Debbie and the kids were still in Durban, he would often call them and he would talk to the kids about how he's going to buy them some quad bikes when they come back. So obviously the kids were very excited about this and they could not wait to go back home. But of course, this was just another one of his bogus promises. But Kevin already knew that this was not going to happen, that they were not going to get any quad bikes like his father was telling them. And at this point, Tony started to realize that Kevin really wasn't falling for any of his fake promises anymore. And another thing that he started to notice was that the iron grip that he had on his family was starting to loosen. The money that Tony got from selling their previous home, he planned to use it to pay off a lot of the debts that he had at that time. And this included months worth of rent, and then he also had to try to pay off the kids' school fees and also try to get them new uniform as well as learning material for the new year. But he quickly saw that this money wasn't going to be anywhere close to covering everything that he had to pay for. So Tony started seeing that in January, when the time came to purchase new things for the new year, his wife was finally going to see the secret that he had been hiding from her all this time, the fact that he had no more money whatsoever. On the 16th of January in 2002, it was the last few days of the school holidays, and Kevin had a friend over and they were just chilling and listening to music. And then Caitlin was at a slumber party at a friend's place where they were just having some fun. But this fun time was not gonna last long because Tony decided to go to Caitlin's friend's house to get Caitlin back. And then he also took Kevin's friend and decided to take him back home, even though Kevin had already put in a request that the friend could sleep over at their house. And just like that, the plans that the kids had for that day were cancelled by their father. At around 9 p.m. that night on the 16th of January in 2002, according to Debbie, everything was just completely fine in the house. The kids were already sleeping at that time and Tony was just normal as well, so everything seemed normal. However, Debbie had no idea how things were about to go wrong that night. She ended up going to sleep, but then she had to wake up again around 5 a.m. because she wanted to use the bathroom. And then after that, she got back in bed and then she passed out again. But a little later on, she woke up to her husband viciously attacking her with an axe. And he struck her 3 times with it, but she fell unconscious from the very first blow. Then after attacking his wife, Tony turned his attention to Kevin's room and he went in and did the very same thing. He struck him 3 times with that axe on the head. And again, he did the very same thing to their other 2 kids. After this, he wrapped the bodies of his own children in duvets and then he stacked them up on top of each other in his study. Kevin was at the bottom, Caitlin in the middle, and then Craig, the youngest, was on top. And after stacking up the bodies of his children like that, he decided to take some family pictures as well as some family documents and business documents, and he put them on top of the bodies, and then he started to pour gasoline all over them. And then between 6:30 a.m. and 7 a.m. of January 17th in 2002, Tony Adlington set the bodies of his children on fire, and then he took a gun and then he turned it to himself and shot himself right in the head, dying instantly. And even though Tony thought that the kids were dead when he set them on fire, Autopsy reports revealed that they were actually still alive because they still had some smoke in their lungs that they must have inhaled while they were unconscious and unfortunately unable to react to what was happening to them. Then at 7:04 a.m., the police as well as firefighters were called over to the scene because now the flames were very visible in that house. The firefighters tried searching for anyone they could find inside, and when they found Debbie just lying there, they knew that something definitely happened in this house, that this was no accident, something sinister definitely happened in that house. And at first, they thought that Debbie was dead, but then one of the firefighters saw her hand slightly move, and that's when they realized that Debbie was still alive. So when they saw that she was still indeed alive, they decided to act quickly by pumping some oxygen into her lungs so they can prevent any brain tissue damage. And then they took some rags that they found and then they sterilized them with water so they can wrap them around her head to cover up her exposed brain tissue. And it was actually said that their quick thinking is what most likely saved her life that day. And after this, paramedics finally arrived at the scene and they took Debbie to the hospital. And other first responders decided to stay behind to look through the house. And when they found the bodies of the 3 kids and the body of Tony in the study, that's when they knew that something definitely happened in this house. Something very, very terrible happened in that house. Investigators came to the scene, and when they started looking around, they first thought that the family were victims of intruders who came by and also shot them. But when the blood spatter was studied, it revealed that they were actually looking for a sharp object, which was more likely responsible for what happened, and not a gun. Further investigation then finally revealed Tony's secrets, and that was the fact that he was in a lot of debt, including unpaid car installments as well as rent expenses. And according to Debbie, she always thought that the car was bought in cash because that's what Tony told her. But of course, he lied to her. Debbie was in a coma for 3 weeks, and when her family learned about the incidents, they flew in immediately from Durban. At first, the doctors believed there was no way that Debbie could come out of this, but her fighting spirit just couldn't give up that easily. And as the weeks kept on going by, Debbie was gradually recovering. But unfortunately, Debbie only found out about her kids when she finally came out of the coma. And while she was in a coma, a memorial service was held for her kids and their bodies were cremated because her family just had no idea if or when she would finally wake up again. And when she did wake up, she started asking around about her kids, and it was just too difficult for her family to let her know what happened. And according to her, Debbie said that she thought she had been in a terrible car accident. But eventually, even though she was suffering from mild amnesia, the memories came back bit by bit. And her family ended up telling her that she was attacked by Tony, and unfortunately her kids didn't survive, and this broke her into a million pieces because according to her, she said that while she was still in a coma, the only thing that kept her going was coming back to her kids. But now she had woken up only to be told that her kids have been killed, and they've been killed by their own father. But despite all the pain and depression that she was feeling at that time, she decided to push through once more for her kids, to be able to live on, to remember them. So she got herself up and started the process of physiotherapy. The left side of Debbie's body was completely paralyzed. So because of that, it became very painful for her at the beginning of her physio. But she managed to recover and walk again, even though she won't be 100% back to how she physically used to be. Before the attacks happened, Debbie was working at the tuck shop of the school that her kids went to, and she was the manager of that shop. It was then revealed that Tony was actually stealing money out of the bank account of the shop. And when Debbie found out about this, she tried to open up another bank account to stop him from stealing the money. But then all Tony did was he applied for a new checkbook after forging his wife's signature so he can keep stealing more money until nothing was left in the bank account. And this forced Debbie to quit her job as the manager of that shop. It was also revealed that Tony had 4 other aliases that his wife never knew anything about. And then he also bought a gun using his wife's names. And of course, Debbie still didn't know anything about this because she never had a gun license to begin with. So obviously she would never agree to getting a gun without the proper documentation for it. But it was discovered that the gun that he used to shoot himself with was not the one that he bought under Debbie's name. That gun was under his name. So because of this, there was a theory out there that was put up by the host of this podcast that I was listening to regarding this case called True Crime South Africa. And the theory is, what if Tony decided to get that gun under Debbie's names so he can kill those kids with that gun and then make sure that his wife took the fall for it? And if you think about it, it's an interesting theory because Tony already had a gun of his own. Debbie moved back in with her parents in Durban for the rest of her recovery, physically, emotionally, and mentally. And then eventually she moved back to Cape Town and started working again. In a few years after the attacks, Debbie decided to have a proper funeral for her kids. Because remember, when the memorial service and the cremation of her kids were held, she was still in a coma. And also, even at this point, the ashes of her kids were still kept at the funeral home, waiting for her to come and take them whenever she was ready. So Debbie, along with some close friends and family, had a small funeral for her kids so she could spread their ashes in a place of her choosing. And after this and much more physical and emotional healing, Debbie consulted with her psychologist and her doctors about the fact that she still didn't want to give up on motherhood, and she wanted to be a mother once again, and they didn't see any reason why they couldn't give her a go-ahead with this. So Debbie decided to go to a sperm donor facility in Cape Town, and after a few attempts, she finally became pregnant. Then on December 12th in 2005, Debbie gave birth to a beautiful baby girl that she named Kylie. Debbie and Kylie would often visit the gravesites of Kevin, Caitlin, and Craig because Debbie said that she had no intention of hiding what happened from Kylie. She wanted her to know about her siblings because she felt that it was very important for her to know. And though Debbie said that she had forgiven her husband for what he did to her, she said that she could never forgive him for what he did to her kids. And she now works as a motivational speaker to share her experience and try to uplift other people who have been through the same thing. And I, for one, hope that her work changes the lives of many. But yeah, guys, that was the horrific story of the Adlington family murders. And I have to be honest with you guys, when I saw the title of this case, I thought the information was going to tell me about some intruders who came in and killed an entire family. I did not see any of this coming. But rest in peace to Kevin, Caitlin, and Craig. They did not deserve any of this to happen to them. They were just kids who wanted to have a normal childhood and who wanted to have loving parents and grew up in a loving home. And we hope that Debbie and Kylie are still doing very well for themselves and that their days are now filled with happiness and love. But that is all I have for you guys on this week's episode. Please do let me know what you think about it in the comment section below and press that like button if you enjoyed the episode. I would really appreciate it. And thank you guys so much for hanging out with me again today. I could never thank you enough for your amazing support. And again, if you are new here, please be part of the family and subscribe to the channel. That being said, I will see you guys in the next episode. And until then, take care of yourselves. Enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers.